I would like to introduce my co-host, my co-moderator, Michael Saltman. He's the former superintendent of San Juan Island School District and former executive director of Camp Orkila. Michael.
Thank you, Diane, and welcome everybody. We're so excited to be doing the second of 3 forums on vacation rentals. You'll recall that last time we spent a lot of time in discovery, talking with our panelists about information and concerns and questions around what the real issues and concerns are around vacation rentals. And this one is moving towards common ground in terms of what solutions are promising now, and how can we begin to identify those and to put some meat on them. And then our third forum will be collaborative action, where we take some action steps next Thursday and begin to design those. If you missed the first forum, it's on the website. We encourage you to go there. We've made a commitment to put questions and comments up on the website and to have all kinds of documents that go along with this. And what I want you to know about that is that this network is funded by your donations, and all of this is made possible through the generosity of people like you that are viewing this. And tonight I have a special announcement in that we have an $1,000 match grant that we can take advantage of, and the donor has said that he and his family will match all donations that are $100 or more, up to $1,000 match. So it means a lot to us tonight if you take advantage of that and get on our website, and it will allow us to continue to make this public service possible. So thank you for that. I want to move right ahead into opening comments. Tonight we're struggling a little bit with technology, and so we won't have video for our guests, but our panelists, but we will be able to be in a conversation with them. And that's really what it's about tonight, is a conversation. So I'm gonna ask each one of our panelists to do 4 minutes or so, 4 to 5 minutes of opening comments. And then Diane and I are going to present 2 questions that are going to be 20 to 25-minute conversations where all panelists will be able to jump in and do that. As Diane promised and told you, Doug is not with us tonight, but we do have a video, and we're going to start with that. So let's cue up that video and hear Doug's opening comments.
Thanks again for the invitation. It's always interesting to talk to folks in the San Juan. You're an engaging group of people, and I'm happy to be included. It's a nice cap to the work that we've done there already. And I am a consultant in my day job, but in this case, I'm just volunteering, but it's always nice to sort of be part of the story there. On the meeting format, I could tell from some of the comments and questions that there was some frustration out there from the folks who couldn't weigh in. Of course, I agree that Zoom is just not interactive enough, and we've all had to live with that for a year or so, but hopefully not too much longer. Nobody's fault, but for the record, I can't wait till we can start meeting as human beings again and talk to each other, because I think there'd be a good conversation to have. Okay, a few thoughts on the things that I heard and things I'd like to maybe get on the table for your next session, and I will be back for the third one later. On the affordable housing issue, which we really barely touched the first session, I appreciate the complaint about addressing how long-term rentals are being converted into vacation rentals and at a certain rate, and how that affects affordable housing in general. Just remember that only a subset of those long-term rentals are actually likely to become successful vacation rentals. What's good for one of those is not always good for the other. And then a subset of those are only going to be part of the affordable housing solution. If you have a very expensive home, that's never going to really be an affordable housing solution. I know from some other gateways and in high amenity regions, like ski resorts and vacation areas like Aspen, North Carolina Outer Banks, and Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket, which I agree, maybe they're a little bit out of your real estate market, but they actually act a lot like the way your place does. If you want affordable housing in these places where the real estate is this expensive, you're probably going to have to tax somebody to do it. ideally somebody else, right? But if you don't have somebody else, you're going to have to come up with some way to pay for it, possibly from your biggest employers, teaming up group homes and things like that. That's what they do in skiers. That's what they do in the Outer Banks. It's really the only way you're going to get it covered. But I'm fully agree. I'm not an expert in affordable housing, so I'll leave it at that. There was some discussion about anecdotal data and quantitative data, and the idea that we shouldn't just dismiss anecdotal data. I totally agree with that, but you can't take anecdotal data as quantitative. You've got to realize it's great at raising issues. It's not great at confirming whether those issues are a big thing or a small thing, and you need the quantitative data to follow up on. As an example, there was some discussion about how some vacation rental guests misbehave or break the rules and therefore have some greater impacts that people are trying to solve. Sometimes those folks do that out of ignorance. Sometimes they do it willfully and disdainfully. And it's important to pay attention to the two types of ways that they break rules. People are on vacation. They don't always behave as well as they might when they live at home. They're not always as accountable for it. And so you do have to have some more stuff in place to try and deal with that. But to solve the problem, you need to do more than just have anecdotal data about, oh, there was a party house and it was like this, and here's how that went. What you need to do is get a system for dealing with complaints, dealing with problems, recognizing that you need to collect information about where they happen, when they happen, how often they happen, and any other particulars about it, because that's how you solve it. To address that a little bit further, if it's an ignorance problem, if people are making mistakes because they don't know what the right thing is to do, like water use or parking in the wrong place or leaving trash out for critters to get into or whatnot, you can maybe solve that with some better posting of the rules, better follow-up from hosts, that sort of thing. But if people are, having rock and roll parties at a time when they shouldn't have them in a neighborhood where the density is too high for that to happen, you're going to need a compliance or an enforcement mechanism in place. And it sounds like you have one, but it's kind of hit or miss in the COVID year. So you've got some work to do there, but I think those things are something you can pay attention to. I know something about breaking up parties. I was what they call a dorm daddy or a resident assistant in the national parks for several years, where I was running a dorm, and they were basically college kids with no lives, no schoolwork. So they were definitely interested in parties, and it was my job to bust them up. And doing that correctly is also kind of got some tricks to it. So sometimes you come in hard and sometimes you come in with education, and it pays to know the difference because those things have different results. There's a lot of discussion about key information needs. We didn't actually get into much of the details about what the county should be collecting about vacation rentals, but I do have a few ideas. I'd note that what I know about this is mostly from when we were doing our work a few years ago. And I know that Erica Shook has developed a better system, and she's digitized the existing data. And the new law in 2018 was collecting better data. So I know it's better than what I know. But even so, I think there's a few things on the list that you haven't quite figured out yet, or that you ought to try and get information about. So it's not just the number of vacation rentals that matters, it's the impacts from the vacation rentals that matters. And that depends on the number of people that are staying in them, the frequency that they're occupied, and the number of vehicles they bring. So if you're not collecting data about those things and organizing it seasonally, you're probably not understanding the full picture. I think you should also organize that data by type of vacation rental, because there is a difference between the single homes with multiple guests and a room or two in a house, a homestay or apartment on the property. Those are different. They act differently, and how people behave in them are differently. And you probably should collect information about them differently. Seasonality matters. If it's off-season use, you don't really care. If it's peak season use, you care a lot, because that's when the impacts are put the most stress on the system. And vehicles matter. We really need to know if people are bringing their vehicles, and then how often they're using them and where they're going with them. And we collected some information about that from visitors and residents. But I think that's something that you ought to try and get from your vacation rental people, that it would be important to know. Along those lines, as I've discussed before, I think in the first session, the number of people coming to the islands as visitors, people that don't live there full time, whether they're staying in a vacation rental or staying in a second home, or whether they're staying as guests of a owner of a second home, they act a lot the same. They're interested in the same sort of thing. And we really need to know how many of them are there. And we don't know because the ferry statistics don't tell you that, but they could. If you had a running tally of the number of vehicles on any given island, you could develop that with some precision. It would get more precise over time, and it would give you a metric to pay attention to. So you would understand when things go to hell in town in Friday Harbor or East Sound because there's too much traffic or long lines at the stop signs, this and that. This would tell you why that's happening, and you begin to start associating or become calibrated to this new metric. And that's the metric that you need to be paying attention to when you decide whether you want to have more hotels, more campgrounds, or more vacation rentals, things that you can control. And you may or may not be able to control them, but you can't really answer that question till you know how many vehicles is too many, and you don't know that now because we don't have a good metric. Finally, if you do a visitor vacation rental cap, I think it ought to be island specific. I think it possibly should be neighborhood specific, because an interesting analysis might look at where those VRs are concentrated. Some neighborhoods are likely to be saturated, and that might be a problem. You might think about a standard of having no more than X% in any given neighborhood. That would be an interesting sort of standard to try and develop, but the devil will be in the details of that. I think if you have a cap, it ought to be vacation rental specific. So types of vacation rentals matter. Again, talking about the difference between single family homes and homestays or place where the host is on the same property. It also seems to me like whole houses that on big properties with lots of amenities might have a lot lower impact than you think. Whereas homes that are just getting a person there and their vehicle there, but then they have to go to the public parks to get beach access or do all these other things, they're going to have a bigger effect on your actual quality of life in town. You also might want to just pay attention to the diversity of vacation rentals that you have so that you make sure you attract a range of visitors and not just the so-called filthy rich. Let's see. I think you should not have a vacation rental capacity until you've at least thought about a larger capacity for each island. And I don't think you can know that until you figure out some metrics for that. As I think I mentioned briefly, if you develop a capacity, you immediately have, the minute you put that capacity in place, you immediately have what's called an allocation problem. You have to figure out who you're going to grandfather in, who you might, how you might distribute new permits, and whether that's going to be through a lottery or pricing and an auction or first come, first serve, or how you're going to do it. And that is another whole world. And we've done a lot of that with regard to permits for rivers and in other places where there's limited entry systems for public lands. And it's a hornet's nest. It's just letting you know that it's not an easy thing to do. So fundamentally, I also just think you should pay attention to whether your goal in reducing vacation rentals is to reduce the number of people coming to the island, or is it to make money over the people that do come so that you can spend it on the things that you need to deal with their impacts? You should sort of make clear what your problem is when you don't have compliance with vacation rentals. I recognize that the decisions you guys made in 2018 with the new vacation rental rules, they interact with a bunch of other factors, including COVID, recessions, ferry decisions, tourism trends, et cetera, that could change how those things work. And we really haven't had a couple of normal years, so to speak, to see how well they're working. So I think things could be getting better, but you should definitely recognize that those are just a few of the factors. They all interact with each other. They're very dynamic. And no matter what system you put in 2018, you're going to have to do some adjustments. Just plan on that having to happen. You have a lot of information for this place. You have a lot of shared values that people agree with trying to do some of this work. So I think you're on the right track, that you should be able to do that. But I realize that money is always short. In COVID years, maybe it's even shorter. So counties sometimes get stretched trying to do this kind of work. I guess as a final point, I just have you recognize that keep your eyes on the big prize. So while vacation rental caps or limits seem to be on the agenda for some folks, and other people are fighting desperately not to have that happen. The big prize is figuring out how many is too many visitors for each island. Are those things getting threatened by the current use level, or is there room to grow? And what can you do about it? And whether it's a vacation rental, second homes, or hotel and campground accommodations, all of those are visitors. All of them bring cars and do stuff at your public lands. And that's where the, kind of conflict comes. And so that's what you want to pay attention to. And then last thing is that the work that we did with the surveys gives you a lot of specific information about support for dozens, if not over 30 good projects that would help reduce the impacts of visitors on public lands, in Friday Harbor, in East Sound, in other places that are congested. And those are solutions that cost money to fix, but you have a bunch of ways to make the impacts from tourism feel less, even if you can't reduce it. And you may or may not be able to have the political will to reduce it or keep visitation down, but you certainly should be able to develop the political will to do some of these solutions, because there's a lot of support from them, from businesses and from residents and from visitors. All right, with that, I wish you well. I will see you guys on the 24th in the last session. I think I have that date right. Thanks, and we'll talk to you soon.
Well, we appreciate Doug taking the time to put that video together for us. Now I want to invite our panelists to have some opening statements, tell us what they've been thinking about, maybe reactions to your comments and questions over the past week. But let's have each person sort of lay some groundwork for some conversation tonight. And I'd like to start tonight with Jan.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to be back, and really nice to listen to Doug kind of summarize what happened at the last panel. I really appreciated his words, and I have so many things I'd love to talk about that he brought up. A quick introduction. I just wanted to mention again that I have lived on Lopez for 20 years now, and I've worked here full time that entire time. I think the first thing I'd love to just briefly touch on is, same as Doug, affordable housing. In my 20 years and in my partner's 35 years, housing has always been difficult to find. I mean, we have this thing on Lopez called the Lopez Shuffle. And, you gotta shuffle from place to place trying to put a year together in terms of your housing. It's not a new phenomenon, I'm afraid. What is new actually these days, in my opinion, is that jobs are easier to find, and better paying jobs are easier to find. I wanted to quickly mention, in my opinion, there's two different types of affordable housing. When we say affordable housing, I think we're really talking about those nonprofits like Opal and Lopez Community Land Trust that actually receive subsidies, and they use the subsidies to build housing that's available to folks within a certain income bracket. Right now on Lopez, we have about 60 units of those. And on Orcas, there's about 190 units of those affordable housing places for folks to live. My personal feeling is those organizations are doing extremely well, and I think they're going to keep going and giving us more good affordable houses. There is also a second tier of housing that I like to call housing affordable to workers. And this would be people that make too much money to actually go into affordable housing, but they don't really make enough money to buy their own place here because of the cost of housing. And personally, I feel that this is the tier that we need to focus on right now. I wanted to mention a 2015 housing study that looked at all the houses in the county and tried to identify what they're being used for. And they were saying that about 7% are being used for vacation rentals, and about 36% are what they call vacant, which is actually second homes. So it's folks that, own a house here, their primary residence is somewhere else, and they come up to use their home here on weekends, in the summer. And it's quite different from long-term rentals or owner-occupied houses. So in my opinion, I would love to see our county start to come up with ways to kind of look at that 36% of our houses that are vacant. And here's a couple ideas. One is we could maybe find a way to subsidize property owners that have those vacant homes so that renting them year round would be a viable alternative for them. Another thing is we could educate property owners about how to minimize the risks of providing year-round rental housing.
1 minute, Jan, 1 minute.
Okay, thank you. Another thing is I thought it'd be a county initiative to allow and promote the construction of high-density, small, low-cost housing units that seasonal workers could use. And finally, I think we need to involve business owners who need seasonal workers in the responsibility of providing housing. So that's kind of what I wanted to say about affordable housing. And just to wrap up about the caps thing, boy, I love that idea that Doug came up with about seasonality. I'm kind of curious. I don't think people mind the numbers of tourists here in the shoulder seasons and the winter. I think it's the summer that makes us feel like it's a little too much. And I would love to talk about how we could minimize the impact of those summer months, like he talked about with 30 projects that could reduce that impact. Very curious, and I'd love to hear more.
Thank you, Jan. Okay, so Toby, I welcome you for some opening comments and thoughts, and you've got about 4 minutes.
That was good. Thank you, Jan. Thank you to Doug as well for his studied comments. I would like to just say a general comment here, though, and address his part of it in another statement. So here's where I think we are after the first session. The participants here and the organizers and the moderators, and I believe, the wonderful Zoom audience as well, all share a common bond here in the love we have for the San Juan Islands, with the unique blend of rural ambience and the quaint villages, the spectacular forested shorelines, and the small town friendliness. We all live here by choice, and we want to pass these values on to future generations. So I see that as a foundational principle of our ongoing conversation. 2, I believe we all agree that tourism here is a mainstay, but tourism carries certain side effects. And the true cost of those side effects is something the San Juan County community has traditionally absorbed. But the San Juan community is struggling with the true cost of vacation rentals, in part because this particular use pattern has kind of sprung up rapidly since 2008, when the Airbnb and these other companies came to be. And partly because they are business entities that seem to be turning residential properties and residential neighborhoods into business zones. That's a key thing. I'll come back to that more. Once they're situated in residential environments, the nature of them as business enterprises, as well as the behaviors and so forth that we have discussed, and the resource issues of water use and generation of trash and so forth are on full display. So that's just kind of a given. Thirdly, if we are to continue to enjoy and cherish what we love about the islands and pass this opportunity along to our children and our children's children, we need to set limits, reasonable and just limits, but limits nonetheless on the vacation rentals today. As I said last time, I really have 3 areas of concern. There's the proliferation, which is, the proliferation is like the trajectory of this use pattern, that, the people who had one next door then come home the next day and find out there's 2, and then there's a third one on the other side. It's the open-ended sort of liability that people face that's causing a lot of the consternation. Secondly, there's customer behaviors. We've talked about that, which points towards enforcement and accountability. Doug had some interesting comments about that. look at it a little bit differently, but we'll get into that later. And the thing about water use and trash and so forth, those are things that everybody should recognize. All homes should have reasonable water use. So that it goes without saying, I think that the county needs to get a better handle on things like water use as it pertains to vacation rentals, but not just exclusively.
1 minute,
I'll just
Toby.
keep that brief
1
and
minute.
let it go until we get further into talking about Doug's remarks and so forth. So thanks. I'll be right here.
We'll invite Jamie to come in and welcome back and take an opportunity to have some opening comments and tell us what's been up for you.
Well, good evening, and thank you again for the chance to participate in these forums. Last week, we caught up and reviewed information that has been produced about tourism and vacation rentals. Although the two are related but independent issues, during the past week, Larry's forwarded on to panel members questions and comments that came in after the forum for the people who are listening in. One of my questions as they were looking at, as these things were being forwarded, is one asked if there's a connection between vacation rentals and the availability of long-term rentals. And we really don't have any data on that, but currently less than 7% of our housing stock are in vacation rentals. So if those were all converted, would they help our problem? I'm not sure. Most of the vacation rentals are located on or near the shoreline. These properties are expensive, and if they were long-term rentals, they would be expensive long-term rentals. And I just want to say, however, the various housing groups throughout the islands are addressing long-term rentals by acquiring properties or building things. Also, it's been suggested that there be a tax incentive for owners to place their property into long-term rentals. The state regulates what taxes and incentives we can implement, and there are currently no programs. It should be noted that a reduction in property tax also affects school funding because most of our property taxes go towards school funding. Finally, I'd like to remind people that this county collects a tax on every real estate sale that goes to housing programs. And that is unique in the entire state, and it's only because we have a land bank. It is 2 years old and has already had a huge impact on housing projects. And in Doug's video, he had an interesting concept about cars. But what I've noticed over the years, particularly when you have an antique car or late or early model car show, is people have a lot of cars here. And whether they're derelict cars or cars in barns, there are a lot of cars here. So it would be hard to really have a good idea of how many people are coming based on the number of cars that people own. And that's just one of those little things that he said. It's all, in the details. And as I said last week, there's only been 9 new permits granted for vacation rentals in the first part of this year. And I don't think also in his video that you can say, or no, I'm sorry, this is Toby's comments, that we all agree that tourism side effects or the true costs of that are somehow related to vacation rentals. I think vacation rentals are a part of the true cost of tourism, but the true costs of tourism are much bigger than just vacation rentals. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. Now we begin a conversation where all panelists will be involved, and Diane is going to pose a question that begins to move us towards common ground and some common solutions. Diane?
Thanks, Michael. So at the end of our last forum, we uncovered some common ground and saw a lot of common interest in seeking solutions to the vacation rental concerns. So I've got a list of a few things that were mentioned, and I'd like us to start exploring some of these areas and how we can develop them more. We can see the potential, develop the potential. So one of the areas was there seemed to be a lot of agreement, and it was mentioned a bit earlier today tonight in Doug's comments as well. There was a lot of agreement on formalizing a good neighbor policy. A lot of talk about vacation rentals want to be good neighbors. Jan, you had great things to say along those lines. So what would that really mean? And what would it look like? You know, I just saw something on Facebook the other day about, oh, be a good neighbor, show up with, and they had with a bottle of wine and a bouquet of flowers. Is that what we mean? Or do we mean something bigger than that? And who'd like to go first? Toby, I'll start with you.
Okay, no, it is much bigger. I mean, this is really just a very generic concept that is based on the recognition that really all businesses want to be good neighbors. And, you know, there's no point in conducting business in an air of conflict or hostility. That just goes without saying. So, you know, we'd like to explore things that the vacation rental owners could do to be good neighbors. They can show us that they want to frame the experience of coming to the San Juan County as something that is special. We would love to see something like that as early as possible in the you know, the recognition by the customer that they want to come here.
Are you suggesting that the vacation renter explain that to the potential rentee?
Whether it's the VR owner or something posted on the, like, Airbnb site or something that basically provides an introduction to the experience that would be expected when somebody comes here.
Okay.
That's just, but that's a very soft, you know, idea. I mean, that's not a regulation of some kind. That's just wait, Larry says try the video.
Oh,
Whoa.
look.
Whoops.
Oh.
Excellent. There's Jan.
Sorry, Toby,
So,
go ahead.
well, I was just saying that this is really a, you know, a soft type of approach to this whole issue. It's just coming up with ideas, sort of brainstorming things like this. It's not a matter of regulation so much. We can't regulate them to be good neighbors. It's something that I'm just asking, you know, them to try to win us over because we're willing. Nobody is saying that we have to shut this business down or run them out of the county or something whatsoever. We just want to coexist and be happy. And I'd love to explore that further. But I really think the essence of it is sort of coaching the customer as early as possible in the rentor-rentee relationship to
Jan,
know what to expect when they come.
Okay. And Jan, you as a rentor, how do you see that happening? How do you do it, and does it work, do you think, with other groups that may not perhaps have an on-site person like yourself?
I do think it works, and actually it is one of the things that we are required to do under the 2018 regulations. So what the county calls it are house rules. And in order to even get a permit in the county, we have to create a list of house rules that we are not only going to post in the house, but also that we ask each guest to sign off on before they can even rent the property. So I just think this is an amazing thing. I think it works very well. Each of us that has a permit has our own list of house rules that is at the county. And we attach it to whatever platform we're using or our own direct booking site, so that when the guest is looking at the property, they have to read the house rules and agree to them before they rent it. And the House rules have certain things that must be included in our county. And Toby, I think you'd love them. It's all the things you keep mentioning. It talks about quiet hours being from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. It gives the 24-hour phone number of an on-island person to call should there be any issues, either with noise or also maybe with the house. Like, let's say there's a power outage and they don't know what to do. They can use that 24-hour number to ask for help. They talk about how many people can stay according to the number of bedrooms. So there are 2 people allowed per bedroom in the home, plus 2 more, and that's it. They talk about how many cars you're allowed to bring. And again, that's based on how large the house is. These are just things that I'm saying out of memory, but I think there's about 15 different things. Oh, the fire ban, you must notify your guests if there's a ban on in the county. It's quite extensive, and that is a pre-booking kind of step that we all already take. And I think it's super effective.
Okay, thanks for that. Jamie, do you want to weigh in on that as well?
Well,
Particularly what the county might be able to do?
I will weigh in on it, but Jan has actually covered a lot of what I would probably say. But anyway, I was just going to say the current regulations includes a local number to call if there's a problem. If that doesn't work, you can always call the sheriff. There's limits on car frequency of trash pickup, a fire inspection every year, and a limit of the number of guests determined by the number of rooms. And, you know, as far as a good neighborhood policy, how to be a good neighbor, I'm always interested in how neighbors treat each other and what their expectations might be. And I think that's a good place to start if there's a homeowner, and especially if there's a homeowner that's converting to a vacation rental, is finding out, you know, how that neighborhood, what that neighborhood expects. And education of our tourists is done, as Jan said, right up front through a contract. But the chambers of commerce have numerous pieces of information. The Visitors Bureau does that both online and again with pieces of information. The Land Bank, the San Juan Preservation Trust, the national parks, the Bureau of Land Management, state agencies such as the Division of Natural Resources and Washington State Division of Fish and Wildlife, San Juan County Parks, and San Juan County Marine Resources Committee, and their focus is mainly on whales and what goes on in the marine environment. But all these people do a lot, not only on the web, but in printed pieces and on docs during the summer, to actually inform visitors of the behavior we expect both on and off the water and among each other.
Okay.
Additionally, each VR is expected to have educational information about water and septic usage, as well as what our community expects. And as Jan said, there are several other items that are detailed in the regulations. And as far as enforcing this, we have a code enforcement person who is just for vacation rentals. And I will have to say the program wasn't as effective last year due to the pandemic. However, in its first year, over $100,000 worth of fines were both levied and collected for people who were not either doing their permit or were in arrears. But it's not perfect, but it is what we're doing. And we have one person, so 7% of our housing stock is in vacation rentals or less than that. And we have one person doing code enforcement on that. And we have 1.5 people doing code enforcement on all of our building permits in the county. So I think we have done or are making a best faith effort in this process.
It's it's a lot of work for 1.5 people, really, isn't it? Yeah. Toby, you put your hand up?
Yeah, thanks for that, Jamie and Jan both. I think you are embracing exactly the spirit that we're looking for. The issue remains, though, when there are abuses or mistakes, how does the system respond? And that's a big key to this particular part of this discussion, is the notion of accountability. And because from the testimony that we have heard, both at hearings and at our public meetings, there are abuses, and some, as Doug was saying, some are intentional and some are by mistake. But that sort of begs the question, because when something bad happens, it's like writing checks. It's like 99.9% of people write good checks. When one person writes a bad check, you need to have a system in place to respond and not say, oh, well, it's just 1 out of 1,000, it doesn't matter. No, when bad things happen, we do need a system to respond. And the key to this, in our opinion, is having somebody at the other end of that phone number who is accountable to the public, who is not the vacation rental owner or an owner's representative, but rather a representative of the people. And that could be, it could be as simple as, somebody getting $50 a month or something. I mean, you know what I mean? It's just, it doesn't have to be an enforcement agent or something. It just has to be somebody who will respond to a complaint or to somebody that's addressing something that's happening at the next door vacation rental, and who gets to the bottom of what that problem is, and then addresses that with the vacation rental owner. So it becomes a two-step process. And that accountability, let me tell you a quick story. This comes from the 1970s with the United Auto Workers, the UAW. In those days, in the heyday of the U.S. auto industry, working those assembly lines was a debilitating profession, because you sat there at a station and you had like 4 rivets to go, like 1, 2, 3, 4, as the assembly line goes past you, and that's all you did every day, all day. And what would happen is people were, the tremendous stresses were occurring, alcoholism was rampant, and so forth and so on. It was just destroying their lives. And some social scientists came up with an idea. Well, what would happen is if somebody missed their station as the assembly line went by, they would have to run off to a supervisor and stop the whole assembly line, which compromised, the productivity of the company, and it just became a disaster. And they were like fined or got demerits or something by the manager or something. Somebody came up with the notion that they could install a red button on every station in that whole assembly line that would stop the assembly, that would just stop the line. So that each person on the assembly line was kind of in charge of their own destiny. And what happened was those red buttons are almost never used. If there had been, 2 stoppages a day previously, there was like 2 a week or 2 a month after those red buttons were in place. And that's kind of what we're talking about here, is the sort of the confidence and the knowledge by people that they have recourse, and that their interests are being respected and represented in the process. That's what we want. So if there's somebody who is designated as a rep, to whom somebody can address a complaint, and they know that will be taken care of, and that it doesn't have to represent, it doesn't necessarily result in law enforcement, but it represents an accountability that ultimately, at the end of the day, pertains to whether or not that vacation rental owner keeps their permit, if there is enough repeat, and Jamie, county's already doing some of that. So that's, I think, what we're looking for, is take this little one step further, so the accountability is vested within a public representative and not a vacation rental representative.
So I want to move this along and get to a few other questions. But I'm curious, and I'll ask this of all of you. Is there anything, I mean, what I hear discussed, both from the county and from Jan and from Toby, is essentially an external or a third party enforcer, if you will. Is there anything that the community can do? I mean, after all, the people who are here are also, here in our community. And I think if we continue to approach this as adversaries, it's never going to really resolve itself. And so I'm curious whether there's something we can do as community members. Jan, Jamie, you both raised your hands up. So I'll start with you, Jan. Unmute, please. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you for the reminder.
Okay.
Okay, I love this topic. I have so many things written down. I have a pre-stage, a during stage, and an after stage, and it all relates to an actual guest in a property. So we've already talked about the pre-stage because they look at the house rules and they agree to them before they even show up at the house. Okay, so while they're staying, there are actually lots of things we can do. Let's talk about what Toby mentioned. Let's say something did happen. Like, let's say there's 4 people outside on a deck and they're getting a little loud. And neighbors are thinking, I have to work in the morning. I wish they'd pipe down. What do? Okay.
Good question.
Yeah. Okay.
Other than Grizzle.
Exactly. Okay. The first thing I'm going to ask is, please do something while the noise is occurring. If you try to do something the next morning, it's too late. Nobody can prove anything. Nobody can make them stop. You can't get sleep. It's just, that's not the best way. What I think is the best way. Ideally, you might know who owns the house. I mean, that's what neighbors are, right? When I got my permit, I had to send out 18 letters, each one to a neighbor within 300 feet of my property. And it said exactly, this is my name, this is where I live, this is what we're doing with the house. I really want to be respectful. Please, here's my phone number, here's my email. Call me if you have any concerns. Okay, so all of those 18 neighbors have it. And this again is required by the county. So theoretically, every neighbor that's near a vacation rental already has the owner's name, phone number, and address, and probably an email too. So if you know the person or if you feel comfortable, contact them some way. I mean, whatever way you feel comfortable with, and let them know what's happening at their house. Okay, let's say someone does that. Let's say one night I get a little ding on my phone and it's a neighbor saying, people are being loud at your house. Well, what am I going to do? I immediately text my guest and I say, I've gotten a complaint from the neighbor. What's going on? Are you guys having a little party? What's happening? Talk to me. And if they don't respond, I call them because we get their phone number, their text, and their email for every person that stays. So I'm going to try every one of those things. And so far, I've had 100% success. They always answer.
Real good personal interaction.
A personal interaction. Okay. So, and once they have the owner of the house contacting them saying, oh boy, the neighbors are saying you guys need to pipe down. I mean, most people are just going to do it. They just will. That's why they picked the San Juan Islands. I mean, if they wanted to have a big loud party, they would have gone somewhere where they can go out and get rowdy.
You would hope. You would hope.
It really is. So then, okay, let's say that doesn't work. Let's say you can't get a hold of the owner. Nobody's responding. Next thing you do, you call the 24-hour number that, again, was provided to you when the permit was given. And you try to get the local person to help you out.
Okay.
If for some reason that doesn't work either, then I'm afraid it's time to call 911 and complain about a nuisance. And, remember, Erica Shook said there are less than 3 nuisances in the last 4 years from permanent rentals. There were 50 from unpermitted rentals. So this is a very rare thing. It does not happen very often. And one last thing, Toby, I would love to see what Doug calls your quantitative analysis. Like, I fully respect that you've heard from people that bad things have happened. I want to see how often, if it's in the same place, what islands is it on? How often is it occurring and what's actually happening? I really feel like if we knew what was going on, we could have really solid responses to them.
Thanks, Jan. Jamie, you had your hand up as well. Sorry.
Well, I just think there's a lot that neighbors can do, and there's a lot that's in the regulations that does that. But I just know, I'm not going to repeat everything Jan just said, but I went through the list of all the permitted vacation rentals on Orcas Island because I feel that they have been, as I said last week, they've been impacted more than elsewhere, and I'll freely admit that. But I also went through the owners of every vacation rental permit, and with the exception of one owner that owns 5, they all live on Orcas Island. So not only do you have to have a local contact, which could be, if it's through a real estate company, it could be anybody, but you can find out or know the owner, and they live on Orcas Island. And as Diane was saying, the most effective way any of us in these islands get things done is one-on-one, whether it's at the, at the dump and recycling, or at a community event. But that's how you get things done. And so, yes, we can think out of the box, and we can deal with this on a one-to-one basis with people that are in our community. And I have not done, Toby, an analysis of the other islands. But again, I was focusing on Orcas because I think they are disproportionately impacted. As I said last week, out of the 1,000 permits we have, over half are on Orcas, and some of them are in very concentrated neighborhoods.
We've got I'm just going to 2 minutes if anybody wants to wrap up. I appreciate your comments. I know it was a little bit unscripted, but I really appreciate that. So basically, Toby, do you want to add anything in just a few minutes? Because I want to move it along to the next question.
Well, I
Turn
mean,
this
we can
over
go to
to-
the next question. I think you're making some good points, but at the end of the day, what we are looking for is a system of accountability that is not vested within the ownership network, and it's more than a hotline 800 line or something that you can call. It's a person who will respond and who will get to the bottom of whatever that complaint is, whether it's noise or whether it's, we've had people with horses in their yard. We've had the kids playing horsey on the propane tanks, and all these things. So
Lots of
out
anecdotes.
there, I can't give you a percentage. We'll never do that. But the community feels very strongly that this needs to be addressed in a way that the accountability is not vested within the ownership network.
It sounds to me like an ombudsman or an ombudsperson,
Something like that.
and that would sort of work between the groups and with the county and law enforcement as necessary. Thanks for that. With this, I'm going to turn it over to my co-host, Mr. Saltman, for question number 2. Thank you very much.
Mr. Saltman sounds so official. Thank you.
I know.
We're going to do something new. The team has been putting together a system whereby we can do polling right in the middle of our webinar. And so we're going to break for about a minute, and there's going to be an opportunity for you at home to take a poll on your screen, and we really encourage you to do that. In fact, there it is. So we'll break for about a minute and then come back to the next question. Seemed like a really long minute, didn't it? Okay. Let's move on to our next question here. This will be another 25-minute conversation. I encourage the panel to raise their hands and make it a dialogue. No particular order. And here's the setup for that. At our first forum, Doug Whitaker asserted that any global or countywide solutions to vacation rental concerns would likely miss the mark and cause other unintended consequences. In his video tonight, he proposed that solutions need to be more nuanced and targeted with more specificity to various conditions among the island communities. So given this notion, in what ways can we design a pathway forward that is responsive to the varying needs and interests of individual islands, to those neighborhoods and communities within the island, and consider the roles of local organizations such as homeowners associations and community associations? So what opportunities do we have for more localized solutions? It's your turn. This could be another long minute.
I could just say that I think it would be a bad idea to vest, permitting or enforcement in like homeowners associations. Most homeowners, for one thing, they vary extremely widely across the board around the islands, and their role should not be enforcement of some kind of county regulations. That's just the wrong place to place that. So I don't think that's a direction that we should be moving towards, or road associations either. So that's one thing. I don't know. I think I'll leave it at that, because that's really the kind of the main alternative that gets brought up in this context.
Is there a system in place now whereby some homeowners associations do regulate whether there's going to be vacation rentals in their development, and how is that going? What do we know about that?
I would just, sorry for just jumping in, but I would name just a homeowners association that doesn't even allow long-term rentals. And they don't allow short-term rentals, and it's very well spelled out. And as a county official, we try to stay out of HOAs because if people want to take it to litigation, it's not that's not our area of expertise. So, when people sign their HOA contracts, that's what they do. And it's, they can do that if they want. They can limit long-term rentals, they can limit short-term rentals, and some do and some don't. In fact, during this past week, I received something from a person on San Juan Island wanting us, the county, us to step in. And it was like, well, it would be a lot easier if just your HOAs said you didn't want this. I mean, why are you trying to get us involved in this?
So let's also talk for a minute about Doug's idea that we really could tailor solutions, even limits on vacation rentals to not only variability on the island, but maybe even within communities. And maybe that's already being done in the urban growth areas. They're being treated a little bit differently than the islands in general. But what about that? Rather than just a global solution, is there an opportunity to be more refined in how we would handle something like that? Yeah, Jan, you're going to have to unmute.
Yeah, when I think unintended consequences, the first topic that came to my mind was caps. And Doug did mention that several different ways. One thing he kept reiterating, which I heartily agree with, is that we really need to be looking at not just vacation rentals, but also hotels, campgrounds, boaters, and even friends and family. because all of those categories give the same pressures to these areas that people are experiencing. For instance, noise, cars, driving quickly, not finding parking spaces, not being able to get seats in restaurants. All of those categories affect those things, especially in the summer. And, Doug really talked about, if you're going to set caps, you have to think about all those categories, and you also have to have some kind of quantitative data that's guiding you. And I want to go back to the very beginning findings of fact that actually created this moratorium in the first place. And if you actually read them, there's not one fact there. It's all subjective, and there isn't anything quantitative there. So I agree with Doug. It's kind of hard to agree on numbers of limitations when you really aren't basing it on much other than just there are too many. So he mentioned allocation. If you set a very strict cap, then you have to figure out how to allocate the few that are available when they become available, and it gets really sticky. I actually have I lived in a place where they have had caps for decades. It's Savannah, Georgia. And they've split up their entire downtown historic area into wards. And then they looked at how many housing units are in each ward. And then they have a percentage of vacation rentals that are allowed. And it actually has worked for them for a very long time. And so I guess I really am looking around our islands and I'm thinking, that really seems to make the most sense for me. I mean, I think we all can name the areas where there seems to be a lot of vacation rentals clustered up. Maybe we need to identify those areas like they did in Savannah and then come up with a percentage. And the cool thing is, this doesn't have to be set in stone for like the next 50 years. You can try it and see what happens and then modify it if it's not doing what you intended.
Mhm. So the theme tonight was moving towards common ground, and I'm curious what your response is to Jamie and Toby to Jan's idea there.
Well, I think not only just to Jan's idea, but also to Doug's ideas, and that there are nuances by islands and neighborhood. And I mean, part of our current moratorium kind of addresses a little bit of those nuances, in that they are only in certain parts of certain land use areas where it seems like the biggest impacts are. And also, as I was mentioning before, these nuances could be handled by hamlets, homeowners associations, or community associations. And just so for those people that might have not been in last week, currently there's a moratorium on new permits, and it applies only in certain land use areas and is in place to address putting caps on the number of vacation rentals by islands. And the saturation will be addressed in our comprehensive plan, which is ongoing. And we have not made a decision, but council has weighed in on how that might go forward. And the planning department has presented various ways of going about it, as far as maybe a certain percentage on available housing on each island. But that is yet to be determined. And and as far as the impact of vacation rentals, since they are only 7% of the housing stock, and that doesn't include the hotels, I'm not sure if you could, I'm going back to Doug's introductory thing. I'm not sure if you could separate it out versus the impact of visitors in general. The Lodging Tax Advisory Committee will be putting out a request for proposals for a tourism management plan that will look at our needs to accommodate visitors, issues such as population. Just got a new hole in the way. Anyway, they will, this thing will apply to a consultant to come up with things that we need to actually manage our tourism population, especially during the peak seasons.
Well, Michael, the concept of the moratorium, the moratorium was a huge focus of the people that spoke up at these meetings, and in fact, who voted in the last election. The last election provided the promise of a moratorium, not on the total activity, not on all vacation rentals, on new permits. And the concept of the moratorium was to stop the bleeding until we could gather data. That's why the moratorium is not steeped in findings of data. The purpose of the moratorium is to stop the pain while we assess the situation. And that's why we advocated that the moratorium be countywide and not just area specific. So that was, that was one thing. So we're really looking for a cap that will be meaningful to people, such that they feel like they have certainty about their lives going forward. There isn't much question that people feel impacted by vacation rentals that are situated next door. The thing about vacation rentals is that they look like a private residence. They don't look like, a t-shirt shop or something, but it's functioning as a business in a residential setting and as a commercial enterprise. And it changes the character of the neighborhood. It changes the character of who you are and how you relate to the people next door. And that has been a kind of a big feature in the way people have addressed this. And we hope that the county will take that, seriously and look at what we're looking for in terms of relief. So there's, I don't know. I mean, we can't decide on a number here, but we can decide on a concept. And I think it is imperative that we keep this target in mind of putting an upper ceiling that has got to be very close to where we are now, because our people have told us again and again, it's not about the number, it's about the pain. And they feel pain. They feel pain now. They do. And it's time that we looked at the situation in that context as to how to provide that relief.
What is the information? The moratorium was really to take a break, but if we were looking at moving forward, what is the key information or the key data that we need to collect in order to have make a meaningful decision about any of this? What's missing? What if we were advocating as a group here and we came to some common purpose around it, what would be the key 2, 3, 4 things that we would want the county to know, or we would want the county to collect, so that we could move this thing forward, rather than have it be a description of individual pain? What, how do we get to the data? What do we want? What would the request be?
I am not sure is what my answer is. We have a lot of data right now. We know how many homes, we know how many are empty more than 6 months out of the year, except this past year, where people maybe feel like there's a lot of people on the islands, but it's actually just people living in that 40% of the usually vacant homes that are just here. So that puts a stress on the grocery store because it's usually during the summer, but it's been all year. So with our new permitting systems and things, we have a lot of data, and I'm not sure. I would be happy to have suggestions for what more data is involved, what more data we would need to do some of these things. And I wanted to address one other thing that goes back a step, if that's okay, Michael.
Yes.
When it was talking about allocation and what problems come up with that, our planning department, we've been doing a lottery for vacation, or not vacation, but for guest houses on your property, for about 15 plus years, our planning department knows how to do it. If we came to a conclusion on a cap, I'm saying if, and we reached that cap, and he's talking about allocation, we already have a model that we've been using that can be implemented towards vacation rentals also.
So, Jamie, do you think that the primary thing that the county is considering is the cap? Do you think that that's really at the heart of what this is?
Well, I think there's other things, but right now the purpose of the moratorium was to come up with some caps.
Mhm.
And planning has given us a few different ways of looking at it, and we've given some feedback, and there have been no decisions made yet, but the whole purpose of the moratorium was to put a moratorium in certain areas to determine caps overall.
Mhm.
Michael, I think the data that needs to be gathered is to get a handle on the true cost, the term I've used a couple of times here. And again, this could be a fuzzy kind of thing, but it's like like air pollution. It's like, what's the true cost of air pollution? And there's a cost in terms of a factory's generation of hydrocarbons or something, but there's also a degradation of health that is harder to quantify. And there's also a degradation of the paint on your house, or things like that. So there is a true cost to tourism. Right? I mean, Doug is absolutely right. There's a bigger picture here. But waiting to find that bigger picture is not an excuse for doing nothing about the vacation rentals now. That's on our plate now. That's what we're considering. We don't have all the answers in place, but I think we do have enough to take sound action that will be meaningful to the community.
Jan?
I really like this idea of a bigger picture look at what's been happening. And one of the things that's happening has been mirrored on the mainland throughout the United States. Okay, so like for the last 10, 11 years, we've been in a solid bull rising market economically. And that's raised the price of housing here and everywhere else in the United States, especially in the Pacific Northwest and California. Okay, so that's partially what brought the increasing numbers of permit applications. They followed that rising economic market. Then we have the fact that we're a vacation destination within a couple of very large urban centers. So people want to come here to escape from the cities. We were looking at about 60 permits a year for the 3 years before 2020.
Right.
In 2020, it went down to 45. And so far this year, we've had 9.
Okay.
And I bring this up because I feel as if there was a certain trajectory that was happening. And Toby, I think your group kind of tagged it pretty well. They're going, we don't want this to continue. It's accelerating too much for us. However, we've had a large interruption. It's a pandemic, and it changed everything. First of all, everyone wanted to come here. And that's why we have 300 building permits in our county right now, 300, as opposed to 9 vacation rental permits. It's because all these folks that were living in cities could start to remote work, and they wanted to come up here and live. We have 900 of those folks just on Lopez, and it's really putting a strain on things. And my point is, it's also changing the whole vacation rental permit climate. Like, I think for a couple years, the vacation rental working group was going in a certain direction. And I feel like I'd like you to look around and see what's happening now and maybe change some of your kind of results based on what's happening. Things have changed.
Just one thing about what you're saying, Jan. we do have a moratorium in place and have since January, which may have an impact on the permits, on the rate of permits. So
I mean, it's possible, but if we were looking at 60 a year and now it's down to 9,
mhm.
and we only have a moratorium on certain areas in the islands,
Yeah.
I'm not
Well,
seeing
those
that
are
as
the
being the
areas with the
only
most,
thing that's
with the
affecting it.
highest density though of permits anyways.
I would disagree with that. We have 4 areas that are under the moratorium, and they are some of the smallest lots, but they are not the highest density of vacation rental permits. But I would take one step back to what Jan is saying. This is an odd year to really, to go to Michael's supposition, to use the data, because our neighboring counties, Island, Skagit, Whatcom, and even Snohomish, they are experiencing the exact same problems with rising real estate prices, lack of rentals, lack of affordable housing. And a lot of that is because people, at least in this period of time, have figured out, if I only have to go to Seattle to my office once or twice a week, I can live in Skagit County, I can live in Cedro-Woolley, I can find an affordable house, and I can work remotely. So those pressures, and I'd like to separate those pressures, although they're related, from vacation rentals. And it's the state of the last year or so, and who knows if that will continue. I mean, if everything opens up and suddenly people go, I don't like this reduced ferry schedule, things may change again.
Just for helping us understand, Jamie, when you speak of county planning, and I think that's comprehensive planning, can you briefly say what that is and how that could impact the conversation we're having around vacation rentals? Can you tie those things together for us a little bit? It's probably a huge question, but
I'll try.
okay.
We're required under the growth we plan under the Growth Management Act. And so there's a long list of requirements. I've got about a 12-inch binder of just the drafts on my desk, and they've all already been updated. But part of that, in relation to this discussion, is what your housing needs analysis is, what your transportation needs analysis is, as well as several other things. And so on your housing needs analysis, vacation rentals become part of that. And they become although it's a big issue, it's a very small item on the number of houses and what we're going to need for people, which is, we don't have a huge anticipated increase by 2036, but it is an increase. And so we have to plan for those things: sewer, water, just kind of carrying capacity of the islands. And it should be done somewhere late in 2022.
And now, an added factor to that is all the people that are moving to the islands as permanent residents when they found out they could work remotely. So your planning has become more complex as a result of the pandemic, I would say.
I agree. I think we have to take a second look at those 40% of houses that were referred to earlier that are normally vacant 6 months of the year. And probably, I don't have a number, but a good percentage of them have been occupied for the past year. And people are rethinking, maybe that condo in Seattle becomes our second residence and we're moving to Lopez.
Right. Well, thank you. for your thoughts on this question, a difficult question to throw around. We have another poll, and so we'll be able to get some feedback on this section as well. So we're going to take a break for a couple of minutes and do another poll, and then we'll come back with your questions. If you have questions that you would like our panel to answer, now is your time to get those questions up in the Q&A so that we can ask our panel a few questions in our last segment. So Diane, I'm looking at these questions and that are coming in. Some of them are quite long, but I understand that you're going to ask the first one, and then we'll let anybody on the panel respond. And if no one wants to respond, we'll just call on somebody. So get ready. So we can do that. Okay, Diane, you're going to have to unmute, and then you can
I
go ahead.
know. Oops, sorry. Okay, I just was noticing, I wasn't sure if the poll was actually working. It looks like now it is. Okay.
Okay.
So I'll leave that for a minute. There are a lot of questions that have come in, and they are some of them quite involved. And I'm going to start with the first one at the top of the list here. Considering that East Sound UGA has a vastly disproportionate higher number of vacation rentals that affect neighborhoods compared to other UGAs, and considering that Friday Harbor doesn't allow vacation rentals in their downtown core, would you support extending the UGA moratoriums extend on the other two UGAs? And are you open to a cap in East Sound, or the fact that we have reached overcapacity already? How would you make this imbalance fair, besides pushing for unlimited vacation permits in our hard hit UGA of East Sound wetland watershed? How many are too many? Jamie, do you want to address that?
I don't know how many are too many. We have a moratorium in East Sound. In fact, that's the most impacted area that we have a moratorium on. It's been suggested on doing the cap, which is the result of the moratorium, that Orcus, and I'm saying suggested. I'm trying to be careful here to let everyone know what the council has agreed to and not agreed to. The cap may have already been reached. Other than that, I would say from comments from council and from others, when we instituted the moratorium, the other UGAs were not as impacted as East Sound. And I'm saying other UGAs, including Lopez, and Town of Friday Harbor is its own entity, but I'm saying Lopez UGA or Deer Harbor or Olga or any of those places.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
So you'll have to signal if you want in on any of these answers. I'll
Yeah.
go to the next question. This is interesting. The question states that we allow out of county businesses to recruit and operate vacation rentals in our county. So these are businesses out of county that are operating within our county. Should we continue to allow that? should be on the table a consideration of only allowing locally owned and operated vacation rentals? Anybody? Jan?
Could you though define what out of county people or entities are to make this a little clearer question?
Now, the question that says out of county businesses, so I assume that they would be property management businesses or property ownership businesses that have vacation rentals in our county, but that they don't have that the business itself doesn't have a footprint in the county other than operating properties. I think that's it, Jamie. Jen?
Yeah, and there are currently 3 property management companies that have a number of listings each. Okay, so just a little note from a host, not everyone uses a property management company. For instance, I self-manage. It's a whole nother topic. But of the 3 that we have, 2 of them have owners that live in our county, and 1 of them does not. And I've been asking this question actually since the last panel, trying to get a sense of what people think of those. And, you know, I think it's just, the answer is, it's not so much where the human is, but who they are. And I think it is possible to live out of the county and still respect this place. But I think it depends on who it is and what their perspective is.
So I'm hearing that you wouldn't advocate for one of the rules would be is that in order to operate a vacation rental here, you have to have a business here. Or I'm hearing you wouldn't advocate for that.
You know, I'm not sure, to tell you the truth. I'm not sure about that. I do think that if you're going to be, you know, most of the owners of vacation rentals actually do live here. And you're just talking who manages them, not who owns them. And I personally do think that you should live here if you're going to own them, or at least get priority. If we're going to have a cap system, the folks who live here should get priority over people that don't live here. But in terms of who manages them, you know, they're going to be under the same regulations that the county sets as anyone else. So unless there are good examples where someone is not paying attention to local, I guess, mentality, I'm not sure if it should be limited.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I take that well, Jen, and Jamie. It really isn't about the residents or the siting of the owner or property manager so much as what's going on the ground, obviously. And the one thing about off-island ownership is that the economic benefits that we recognize that come from tourism and the vacation rental aspect of tourism is that those benefits get exported. If your owner lives in Seattle or Portland or something, they're taking the money home. They're still paying lodging tax, but the rest of the money goes off the island, and that economic velocity is not enjoyed here. So that's not a regulatory feature, but that's just something that's worth mentioning.
Good, thank you. Diane?
Yeah, let's see. This person is specifically asking Jamie to speak to this. A holistic tourism management plan would also address vacation rentals. And this person said that they understood that there's a request for a proposal is being ready to be sent out, about that, Jamie?
I hope to get a scoping document tomorrow. It's not quite ready to be sent out. And I don't know, vacation rentals would be a part of that.
Okay. How, do you know in what way it would be a part of that? Would it be looking at saturation or permitting?
Well, the council has said we wanted to address saturation through the comprehensive plan process. As far as the management plan, I will have to see, I don't have the scoping, so I can't really speak to it.
Okay, okay.
Can
And
I ask Jamie, I guess I don't quite understand. If there is a way in the comprehensive plan to address the saturation in certain neighborhoods, why is it necessary to have that and caps?
Because council felt like we should look at caps as part of the moratorium. And there are different ways of looking at the caps. You can look at caps as a percentage of available housing. You can look at caps by island, or you can do some combination. So I will say a comment, not a conclusion of council, was Councilmember Wolf said, since over half of the current vacation rentals are on Orcas, maybe she would like to see the cap be somewhere close to where the number of permits are now. Neither Councilmember Minnie nor I have expressed a number on either one of our other islands.
I
Michael,
guess the one item that goes, the subhead goes on that, on what Janie's referring to there is, what is your definition of where we are now? In terms of Orcas, in terms of existing compliant active permits, or non-compliant active permits, or non-compliant inactive permits, or moribund permits, or there's different categories. And so we're going to look at a cap primarily, I believe, as what are the active compliant permits, and kind of work from there. And there has been some discussion about the homestay as an alternative, and as to whether that would apply to the cap or not. And I would say absolutely it applies. Otherwise, you don't have a cap. But you could tinker with the percentage of how many homestays you have versus other, standalone. And if the current percent, and I'm just making this up out of thin air, but if the existing compliant active permits are 20% homestay, you could set a target of, say, you want it to be 35% homestay, to encourage the county to move in that direction, because some of the impacts seem to be lower in that, and allow that to take that shift to take place through attrition as people move on or whatever from the standalone sorry, the standalone permits, and have those slots be filled with new homestays. Something like that, I think, would be attractive.
Well, you've brought up one of the main points that our group keeps mentioning, and that is that even though we keep saying there are about 7% of the homes are used as vacation rentals, in actuality, when you subtract all the inactives and you take out all the non-compliance, there's actually between 3 and 4% that are active and compliant. So, I mean, the numbers keep looking smaller and smaller. And I really think, I'm just going to say again, no matter what you do to them, there are other factors that you're going to have to consider in terms of tourism to actually to make a real difference. In terms of what you were saying about homestays, it's funny, I don't look at a homestay as positive because it has less impact on the community. I look at homestays as positive because that means you've got people living here full time who are welcoming basically strangers into their own homes. And so I think they're doing it for economic reasons. And, in addition to the price of housing here on the islands, the price of everything else is increasing as well. And now we're seeing inflation in our country overall. And so those prices of food and gasoline and ferry tickets are going to go up even more. And for those of us that have to work to live here, this is one way that is really viable right now. And it may not be viable 10 years from now. And it wasn't viable 20 years ago because there was no Airbnb. But right now, at this time in history, this model of having folks on the islands, in our homes, and in the properties we own is helping a lot of us to stay here. And I think we need to help working people stay here. That's one of the main reasons I got involved in all this, quite frankly.
I think you're making some really good points there, and we have acknowledged that there is a difference there from the beginning. And that's good that it allows people, that is one of the great benefits of this particular style of doing business. So we support that. That's good. All we're saying though is that if it comes to a cap, that those factors don't exempt those, that use pattern from the cap, but rather it has to be part of it. That's all. Because you still have a business entity situated in a residential setting that changes people's lifestyle. And that is at the end of the day, that's the issue around the proliferation, the trajectory that we talked about. And I believe that's where we need to get a handle on this.
Let me get a few more questions in here from our group. The Port Commission recently approved a lease near the airport on their land for development of vacation rentals. I believe 5 or so were approved, and perhaps that could be expanded to several more. And so the question is, does the port act outside of county government? Does the port have authority to have as many vacation rentals as they want to lease on their land? And what's the relationship of a decision that's made by the Port Commission to what might be made by the county commissioners?
First of all, you'd have to clarify which port, because there are 3 ports in the county. And
Okay, the one that has the airport.
if the Port of Orcas is doing this, they still have to apply for the permits for land use in the county. And the ports are an economic, their purpose by state law is to support economic activity. So they are probably leasing that out to somebody else. They are not, I'm guessing, I'm just going to, I hate to suppose something, but I would guess that somebody came to them with a proposal to be able to do those the same way people come to them to propose to build airplane hangars. So they still have to go through the process.
And would still have to apply for VR permits?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
And it would probably be the leasee. And so I don't know all the situation here, but normally a port, since I was a former port commissioner, would be leasing the ground to somebody, but that's not necessarily true. They could be doing it on their own, but they would still have to get the permits.
I see.
And if I could ask the question as well, the port is, while a separate entity, would still have to follow the county permitting process. That would also be true for the town of Friday Harbor then as well?
The town runs their own rules on vacation rentals, and I am not savvy to all of their rules.
Okay.
And let's not forget Roche Harbor. It's another cluster of vacation rentals that kind of have their own rules, and the numbers are often not included in the numbers that we are throwing around. Like, for instance, 50% of the vacation rentals are on Orcas. I don't think those numbers include town of Friday Harbor or Roche Harbor.
Diane, do you have another question for us?
This one is, we've talked about the impact of visitors on the island. And they've asked, when talking about the impact of visitors, how can the islands communicate this issue with those who visit? Most likely, the visitors are unaware of the issues being inflicted upon the island communities. And so should we communicate this with them in some way, and how would that help? I mean, I know we've got the communication that goes like Jan does to go over things with people, but do they get, that if you go in and stock up at Island Market before you head back home, that stuff isn't there for us, for the people who live here? We don't have the option of going off island that much to stock up, just as one small.
Diane, and again, anecdotal evidence, but probably the greater pattern is that people stock up at Costco on their way in, and the discount wine stores and so forth,
And
such
so they
that
don't,
we don't benefit from the shopping that takes place. Yes, that's one of the more side effects, that we
also
see.
true,
Yeah.
also true.
But here again, it's hard to regulate those kind of things. I thought Jan spoke eloquently about the steps they're taking to help educate people, to kind of get the word out, to create expectation. It's managing expectations. That's great. We'll work hand in hand with you guys until the sun goes down on these things. And I know Jamie will too. So that is a good part of all this discussion. And I really hope that the community is listening and thanking them for that.
So Toby, I really appreciate that. And, there is another thing we do too, in addition to the house rules that I mentioned before. A lot of us have what we call a guest book. So, it used to be you'd go into your rental and there'd be a binder on the desk and you'd flip through the pages and look at, information about the place you've come to. But now, in addition to that, you can also do a digital guest book. And we actually give that to the guests before they even arrive, so that they can kind of plan out things like grocery shopping. So I have all 3 of the Orcas grocery locations in there, and I have a little description of each, and I tell folks, what they can find when they come on island to come to their rental. I also tell them about my favorite restaurants, my favorite shops. I tell them about places to walk. I tell them about Moran State Park. And I do think that, again, we're just kind of nudging them in a certain positive direction. And I do think that they love it. And I do think that they listen, and it helps them understand in a very positive way what the islands are all about.
So Jan, I mean, you're the model here of these things. I mean, this is good. We appreciate that. What we want to do is clone the attitude that you just expressed, such that it's more pervasive. And just thinking outside the box here, we have a Marine Resources Committee that comes up with whale flags and puts visitor overlooks at the ferry landing and so forth. Maybe there's room for an advisory committee on tourism, not just vacation rentals, but on tourism, and have that composed of people that represent the kinds of parties that we have, on this computer screen here today, and come up with these kind of brainstorming things and help with the adjustment of the whole presence of this business, within the community, and just really help the whole thing. I don't know. That's just thinking out loud.
Okay, I'm going to ask the final question tonight. And go, Jamie, go ahead.
I just think from what I do know from interviewing our couple of stores here on Lopez is they had a great year last year, particularly with the people who decided to move here during the pandemic. And our main grocery store also said if they didn't have their summer traffic, they wouldn't be open for us in the winter. And I just want to make sure that I'm going to put some brackets on my comments. Is this is supposed to be about vacation rentals, and if we're going to talk about tourism impacts, that goes into a different realm that I am not prepared to talk about as a council member.
Okay, let me ask this last question tonight, and let your answer be your good night as well. So find a way to, if you're going to speak to this, to close. This is about the lodging and occupancy taxes collected by the county, and wondering if that money could be directed and used in some ways that would mitigate the vacation rental and maybe maybe the tourism issues related to maybe those 30 recommendations that Doug had at the end of his report. But how can we use some of the financial resources we have now through the lodging and occupancy taxes to address our concerns here? Anybody?
Can you clarify that as to what do you mean by mitigate?
Yeah, so I guess the question is, what is that money, can that money be allocated toward dealing with some of the issues around vacation rentals? And I guess most specifically, I don't know if Jamie, if you saw those 30 recommendations at the back of Doug's report, it kind of went island by island by island, whether some of the money could be used in that way to mitigate the impacts of tourism in general.
I guess you're asking me to tee this off. Again, I'm not going to go into mitigating tourism in general. Lodging tax money is very, unfortunately, it used to be a little more flexible, and now it is very tightly regulated on what we can do with it. There's capital money as well as promotional money. So that's why that was the reason for my question. Could you clarify what you mean by mitigate?
Yeah, I don't know.
So part of the lodging tax funds are being used for this request for proposals for a tourism management plan, because way back, Brent Snow from Roche Harbor said, you know, why don't we have a plan as to where we're trying to go? And that would make it a lot easier on how to allocate these funds. So that's kind of where we're going with that. And it's not about, actually, with the lodging tax funds, if you use the word mitigation, it's immediately thrown out as eligible use. If you look at management or promotion or something, then it's a different thing.
Thank you.
Michael, I might just,
That is not our normal,
oh, sorry, I'm sorry.
by local, it's by state law.
Toby.
Sorry, I apologize, Jamie. I didn't, I thought you were through there. So Jamie's absolutely right. The lodging tax is very tightly controlled. I would just point out that the Charter Review Commission has 12 or 15 proposals that they're advancing for this upcoming election this year. And one of them is kind of another look at lodging tax. I don't know any details about that. You'd have to speak with them about that, but that's on the table. Some kind of modification or expansion or realignment of how those funds are used. So there is potential there, I guess. As just a concluding statement, I think I would like to offer that in our approach to these problems, as we go forward, that we remember what's called the precautionary principle, which is the notion that you do absolutely everything you can to mitigate potential harm until you're convinced that that harm doesn't exist. And this is a principle that's applied in a wide range of contexts and planning and in social structures and so forth. And if we use that as a guideline, I think it'll help us move forward. Because I think we're onto some good things here. I think there are some things we agree on. And I'd like to focus going forward at our next session on trying to hone in on the places where we do agree. And I look forward to that. But I'd love to see us guided by this notion of we take every possible precaution to get it right. And if all we've done is made it too right, then we can undo that later on. But let's take on that higher bar early on. So
Thank you. Thank you, Toby. Jan, your turn to say goodnight. But you're going to have to turn on your mic.
Thank you, everyone. It's been another stimulating conversation, and I look forward to meeting with you again next time. Have a good evening.
Thank you. And our next time is next Thursday, when we're moving towards collaborative action, as Toby spoke so eloquently about a moment ago. Um, I want to thank the people who did make donations during this time. I want you to know we're all volunteers here. We're doing this because we care about it, and the network is funded by you and by your care and support. We've received a couple donations that are eligible at the $100 level for our match, and we have $1,000 match there. So we hope we can use all of that tonight. So please consider getting on our website and making a donation to support the network tonight. And Diane, take us home.
I love that phrase. Thank you all so very much. Jan, Jamie, Toby, your time has just been really gratefully appreciated. And to those of you who are in the audience, in the Zoom community, and are watching this live streamed, thank you very much for your engagement, for your interest, for your questions. There will be more questions posted on the San Juan Island Community Network website, sjicn.org. So check that out. There will also be a video available of this tonight's forum, like there was for last week's. And also, please fill out the survey. It's important for us to know how this is received, and it helps SJICN plan for future events like this. Did I miss anything, Michael? You think of anything?
Just that the survey is going to flash on the screen as soon as we say goodbye.
Okay. Again, thank you so much. Have a great week. Keep your eye out for the survey and take good care of each other. Thank you very much.